enough evidence saying that our magnetic field is actually weakening, and what will happen, if I'm right about this, is it'll get so weak until it eventually flips, correct?
Yeah, because it's a complex situation, but I've done a lot of thinking and studying of the whole phenomenon of the Earth's magnetic field getting weak and beginning to drift, and then as many scientists say, once it passes that period where it becomes weak and begins to drift off of its poles, away from its geomagnetic poles, north and south, then it begins to reverse itself. And you have to look at the cause. First of all, what causes the Earth's magnetic field to be generated in the first place? And once you understand that, then you can understand what mechanism would cause the magnetic field to reverse itself. Well, that mechanism that causes the Earth's magnetic field to be generated in the first place is the swirling circular motion of the liquid metal core within the Earth. The Earth has basically a core, an outer molten, mostly iron core. Mm-hmm. And within that mostly iron core is a hard, scientists believe, is a solid metal inner core that's smaller. So it's sort of like a solid, it's a solid metal core within a larger liquid outer core. Now, this outer liquid core swirls sort of like a whirlpool in your blender. If you've ever watched the food or a liquefied food in your blender, it sort of creates a circular whirlpool. And that's what happens to Earth as a result, Earth's molten core, as a result of Earth's rotation. And that all makes sense, too. I mean, you could take a bowl of liquid and take an example of a potter. Do you ever see a clay potter? He puts a clay pot on a rotating pedestal, and a motor rotates that pedestal as the potter holds the wet clay and shapes it with his hand as the clay turns or rotates. Well, if you took a bowl of water and placed it on that rotating pedestal, you would see the same kind of swirling action that occurs within the rotating Earth. Now, that magnetic field, as long as that swirling motion of the Earth's molten iron core is smooth and regular, then you're going to have a very nice, strong magnetosphere surrounding the Earth. It'll be vertical. The lines of force will be vertical. That is perpendicular to the horizontal flow of the molten core itself. So the magnetic field is perpendicular, like the skin on an apple. You'll see those little striations or streaks, vertical streaks on the skin of one of those delicious apples or a different kind of apple. You'll see vertical streaks. Those streaks might be likened to the invisible vertical magnetic field lines surrounding the Earth. So as long as that swirling molten core is smooth, it revolves in a smooth swirling action, then the magnetic field will be strong. But what is happening now is you're getting these irregular blasts of electrical particles, negative electrons and positive protons from the sun, which are excessive, more frequent, more powerful than in normal times. And as a result, this energy, the electric electrons, negative electrons and positive protons, strike the magnetosphere sort of like a balloon. I'm likening that skin on the apple now to a balloon surrounding the Earth. And that balloon gets hit and it becomes compressed by the electrical energy, which is actually electromagnetic energy from the sun, because of moving particles, these streams of electrical particles from the sun, generate their own magnetic field. So you have a magnetic field from the solar wind jousting with the Earth's own magnetic field. And there's a clash, there's a dance between the two, and one pushes back against the other. And the net effect is that this energy from electromagnetic energy being blasted out from the sun feeds back, is coupled back, just like an electrical transformer would couple electrical energy from the one winding, one coil of wire in the transformer to an adjacent coil of wire. Even though there's just an air gap, there's no electrical metal connection between the two coils of wire. They're both parallel to one another. Still, that electromagnetic energy is coupled from one wire to the primary winding to the secondary winding of a transformer. likewise, that energy from the solar electromagnetic sun's solar wind energy is coupled into Earth's magnetic field. It feeds back, just like into the core of an apple, feeds back, and now it begins to disturb that solid iron core, that nugget within the swirling molten core of the Earth. And that core, that solid nugget, that metal core, deep within the center of the Earth, begins to get pushed, actually pushed. There's a force, a magnetic force from this field feeding back into the Earth that is nudging that metal solid core off of its center point. This is my theory. No one else has really expressed this theory before that I know of. And I've just put it out. I've taken a lot of time to write it up very carefully. And this is, again, a theory, but it makes a lot of sense because it conforms to the principles that I used to teach in physics and that I've learned in the study of physics. It all sounds very basic to me.
Well, it does make a lot of sense, and there's enough evidence in history to show that the magnetic field has, flipped before, and that goes without saying. But what is the worst-case scenario? Now, I guess I don't want to use the word if this happens. It's more of when it happens. What's the worst-case scenario?
Well, I can read you historical accounts, ancient historical accounts of when this occurred in the past, because scientists, many archaeologists, I should say, are now revealing their studies indicating that these kinds of catastrophes have happened in the past, and they have been provoked by incoming comets. At several thousands of years ago, these things happened at numerous times in the past. So what I'll do, in order to answer your question, I'm trying to find some little quotations that I got from ancient historians. But, it's a little bit worrisome to hear about these things. But before I read them, know that there is a God who has created all of this. He's in control. God is in control of all these events. And God, I don't expect people to believe it now, but just remember it when the time comes, when the difficult times do come. Remember that God loves you. And God says he is bringing this upon earth in order to wake us up, to give us a really strong wake-up call. And if we respond by actually turning our minds and our thoughts to his invisible presence, then he will protect us from all of these catastrophes. So that's what I want you to know in advance of what I'm about to read to you. Quote, from the writings of Pliny, P-L-I-N-Y, Pliny the Elder, an ancient Roman scientist, quote, a terrible comet was seen by the people of Ethiopia and Egypt, to which Typhon, or Typhoon, the king of that period, gave his name. This comet had a fiery appearance and was twisted like a coil, and it was very grim to behold. It was not really a star, so much as what might be called a ball of fire, unquote. So this is what these comets look like. And other people like James McCanny have spoken about their studies of what these ancients have recorded in their annals, various civilizations. The Mayan civilization of Guatemala, the Aztec civilization, the Incas of Peru, and also the Chinese. The ancient Chinese have recorded in their imperial annals, the emperor recorded these horrific events. They looked in the sky and they saw what appeared to be a dragon or a serpent. And basically what happens is the comet that enters our solar system is electrified. It picks up all of this plasma that is blown out by the solar winds. It becomes plasma saturated. So now you have an electrically charged comet, and that's what gives it its glow, its light, and develops a long tail because it pulls in, it's coming in through the outer entrance point, the outer gateway, so to speak, of our solar system, which is way beyond Pluto, way beyond the outer bounds of Pluto. And this spherical, glowing heliosphere is comprised of these positive, electrically charged protons, a whole gaseous cloud of them forming a huge sphere. So when any comet comes in from deep space, it's going to penetrate that wall of positive protons, and electrically sticky protons will stick to it, just the way your sticky electrostatically electrified particles stick to your hands. Styrofoam peanuts, packing in a box, sticks to your hands because it's electrically attracted to your body. So that's what happens to the comet. So the comet comes in, it's loaded with this plasma. It's glowing because of the electrified plasma surrounding it, and it pulls the whole tail of this plasma in with it. But as the comet is being drawn gravitationally closer to the sun, this comet now, its proton tail, positive electrically charged tail, begins to catch up with the comet's nucleus, the comet's nucleus itself. Because what's happening is the comet is coming closer to the sun, and the sun has this huge negative electron cloud around it. The sun is essentially negative. It puts out both positive and negative electrical particles, but it has more electrons than protons surrounding it, simply because the protons are heavier. Protons are 2,000 times more massive than an electron. So they go a lot farther out. When the sun sneezes out these protons and electrons, the protons are like a hardball, a baseball player hitting a hardball. It's going to go pretty far if he really gives it a good shot with the fat end of his bat. It's going to go into the bleachers. But if the baseball player hits a Nerf ball, one of those spongy Nerf balls, it's not going to go very far because it doesn't have much mass. Likewise, the electron, when an electron gets sneezed out by the sun, it doesn't go very far because it has very little mass. But the protons go very far. That's why the protons build up at the outer bounds of the solar system into this huge sphere called a heliosphere. And, so now the sun is largely negative because the low mass electrons tend to stay closer to the sun. They don't get whacked or sneezed very far out. Now this positive comet is coming sweeping in toward the sun. Its positive electrified tail is being attracted to the negative electron space charge of the sun, because we know opposites attract, right? Like men and women attract one another.
Yeah.
Likewise, this tail starts really accelerating because the negative space charge of the approaching sun, or as it approaches the sun, the negative space charge is pulling it with ever greater electric force. And now the tail begins to catch up to the nucleus, and it begins to look like a roller coaster or a serpent. It starts to, undulate. It looks like a bullwhip. It undulates, and that is the serpent effect that was noticed by all the ancient survivors of these catastrophes in the past. The Mayans said they saw what they called a plumed serpent. They called it Quetzalcoatl, or it might have been the Mexicans called it Quetzalcoatl, the plumed serpent. And the Chinese, on the other side of the world, the Chinese saw it and they called it a dragon. And to this day, the Chinese celebrate New Year's with a dragon dance. They have this wild costume that is, or a tent-like, tunnel-like cloth fabric costume that's red like a dragon, and they have men inside of it in a row or in a line, and they jump up and down inside of this costume, or this tunnel-like red serpent costume, and it gives the appearance of the coils of a serpent as it's traveling in. That's dragon dance, which is now, they lost the understanding of where it originated, but that dragon dance itself represents a historical record of what their ancestors witnessed in the skies centuries ago.
I see. Hey, John, if there's a way, maybe you could shout at us just a little louder. You're coming in a little low for everybody.
Yeah, I'm trying. I guess I thought I was. Okay, I'm sorry. Well, let's see. Let me read on now. They said this to quickly cover what I just said. They saw this fiery appearance in the sky, and it was twisted like a coil. It was very grim to behold. It was not really a star so much as what might be called a ball of fire, unquote. Now, quoting Caius, C-A-I-U-S, Julius Solinus, a Latin author of the 3rd century, writing about the people living on the southern borders of Egypt, quote, "The inhabitants of this country say that they have it from their ancestors that the sun now sets where it formerly rose. That's kind of scary to think about that. It's kind of incredible, it is incredible to consider that concept of the sun setting where it rose. That would mean that the Earth would have to rotate in a different direction, change its direction of rotation. And indeed, it sounds like it's impossible to do such a thing. But imagine a bowling ball. If you were to take a bowling ball on the conveyor, what do they call it? The track where the ball comes up when you go to take the ball, before you pitch the ball down the alley, you grab the ball off of this conveyor. Now, suppose you were to let it spin on there, and if it's spinning in one direction, the only thing that could change its direction would be the hand of the bowler, his palm, on the ball, forcing it to change its direction. So it would take a great deal of force, a tremendous amount of force, to change the direction of rotation of the Earth. However, if there were something akin to an external hand, a giant external hand, that could do it, and that hand would be a gravitational force of an incoming huge body. The gravitational pull, it doesn't have to touch the Earth. It's just the gravitational pull of that incoming, intruding large body acting upon the Earth. As it gets close enough, it will exert enough force to overcome the rotational momentum of the Earth and change its direction. And that is what has happened in the past. These people recorded it. They didn't make this up. But let me just continue on from Pomponius Mela, a Latin author of the 1st century. Quote, the Egyptians pride themselves on being the most ancient people in the world. In their authentic annals, one may read that since the Egyptians have been in existence, the course of the stars has changed direction 4 times, and that the sun has set twice in that part of the sky where it rises today. End of quote. So here you have the Egyptians recounting the same effect, that the Earth had changed its direction of rotation.
Mm-hmm.
So this is the kind of worst-case scenario that you're talking about.
And this is just from the magnetic reversal?
Actually, what happens to the Earth, in order for the Earth itself to change its direction of rotation, a large body, such as a dwarf star, which is, scientists believe Planet X is a dwarf star, a large body comes into our solar system. It gets gravitationally pulled in toward our sun by the sun's great gravitational force field. As it's being accelerated toward the sun, it has to pass over Earth's orbital path. And when it gets close enough, if it gets close enough to Earth, its gravitational force, just the gravitational pull alone, is enough to move Earth, to grab it sort of at a distance now. It's a grabbing force at a distance of maybe, say, 20 millions of miles. But that's still very close in cosmic terms. And that gravitational force is felt, exerted by this massive body coming in over a distance of millions of miles upon the Earth, and it actually wrenches the Earth like the hand of a bowler would move or change the direction of the spin on a bowling ball. However, you were right in mentioning the magnetic effect too, because not only is it a gravitational force that's exerted by the incoming passing body on the Earth, but it's also a magnetic force, because this incoming dwarf star has a magnetic field, just as we know that Jupiter has a magnetic field. Jupiter is almost a dwarf star in itself. And so it's not only the gravitational force of this intruding body jerking Earth and moving it off in a different direction of rotation, but it's also a gravitational force that locks on, like one magnet would lock onto another magnet. Earth has a magnetic field, and this object has another, even stronger magnetic field. So it's like a strong magnet getting closer to another magnet. And what is it going to do? That stronger magnet is going to move the other magnet, even though it doesn't touch it, at a distance. That's exactly what happens to Earth. Magnetic.
And, I've seen a really good example of that on a documentary on the Weather Channel, which I'm sure you've seen, where it showed that a rogue planet or what have you, a big object would come through, and the push from it would actually knock Earth slightly out of its orbit, and which would just the slightest bit would change our weather patterns like you wouldn't believe.
Yes, right. I've recorded that. In fact, I've put that on my YouTube channel. That weather channel from the series. The series is titled "Forecasting the End," and it was really fascinating. The diagrams were graphic and showed everyone how logical it is. You don't have to have a scientific degree to see how logical it is that the gravitational force of a large body could do that. Could actually pull at a distance a planet away from out of its orbit. And and they said when it comes in, even if it comes in first somewhere around the outer planets, Jupiter, Saturn, whatever. And I suspect that it's coming in around Jupiter, Saturn right now. But nobody really knows except the government and NASA. However, what they said in that Weather Channel special on rogue planets was that if it comes in, it could actually change the orbit of Jupiter. Now, if it changes the orbit of Jupiter, Jupiter is like a shepherd to the smaller planets like Earth and Mars. So if Jupiter's orbit gets changed by this incoming massive object, now Jupiter starts to guide Earth in a different direction and starts to pull on Earth's and pull it out of its normal orbit, which gives us ideal weather, and changes us to a more elliptical orbit that would cause us to be hot, extremely hot in the summer and extremely cold in winter, such that life would be destroyed, food production would be ruined, and civilization and humanity itself would be decimated. So that's what happens with gravitational forces. Now, it's really of concern and very convincing to see what these ancient historians have said. Let me see, here's another quote from Tractate Sanhedrin. Now, the Sanhedrin were the Jewish council you read about in the Bible. The Tractate Sanhedrin, an ancient Jewish council. This comes from them, quote, 7 days before the deluge, the great flood, the Holy One, God, changed the primeval order, and the sun rose in the west and set in the east, unquote. So you have so many people, so many scholars or historians, writers, statesmen, religious councils from various civilizations. I just read from Egypt, Ethiopia, Romans, etc. They're all saying the same thing. The sun changed its direction of its rotation, so it rose in the west and set in the east. From the Holy Bible, quote.
And if there's anything that I get out of this that's positive is that the human race is still here, even though they have documented this happening in the past. So that's kind of a good sign.
Yes, it is. I mean, the survival rate is supposedly pretty low. I mean, others, you've probably heard of James McCanney, and he talks about how the survival rate in the ancient civilizations during these catastrophes, very few people survived.
Yeah.
But, of course, those few people went on to foster the growth of a new civilization. And you know what the Egyptians said? They said that what happens is that everything gets wiped out, so high technology gets destroyed. You can no longer have all the technological advances that we've had today. I mean, people still have engineers and doctors, but many of them are killed. There's no electricity. There's no way to continue our very delicate interrelated web of technological services and systems. It gets easily disrupted. It's a very fragile system that we have in all sorts of, in our way of life, technologically. So everything gets destroyed, and mankind, the survivors, few survivors, go back to a primitive existence. And they have to start all over again, and it takes thousands of years for them to develop again. Ancient
and then
historians,
this thing comes around again.
Yeah, I mean, ancient historians go back to the sinking of Atlantis, which they estimate was around 9,000 BC. And they had flying machines. They had high technology. They were very much like the United States. They had advanced weapons. In fact, not only were they technologically like the United States, they were also an imperialistic power. Just like all men. All men become that way. You become great. Evil men seize the reins of power just as they have just as they have done in this country. And they use it for evil purposes to conquer and destroy, conquer and kill other people, take over and try to usurp all the power and wealth of the rest of the world, enslaving the world. This is not new. This is the way evil men rise to the top and destroy civilizations. It's happened in Atlantis, and it's happening today. They're using the power and wealth of the United States for their greedy, evil, destructive world domination.
That's right. Hey, John, hang on a moment. We've got to take a break, and I think that's the same thing with us here. I think that the secret to the game is, as Peter says often on World Watchers, love, for one. And you won't hear me say that too often, but love and communion, coming together for the cause, for the better cause, to better humanity. I mean, rather than putting billions of dollars into blowing people up and making the bigger, better weapons, if we had all come together and put them resources into bettering mankind, we'd probably already have another planet inhabited. Maybe we could come back after things happen and fix it up again, and that kind of thing. I think that's probably the way it is meant to be, and we're, as human beings, we're just too damn stupid to figure it out. I mean, we'd rather kill our neighbors, kill our fellow human beings, than come together, work together, and survive as a race. It's puzzling to me. It really is. But John, we are back, and what do you think? You think that's the goal?
Michael, I'm glad you mentioned that. It's only a few people who are really evil who rise to the top and seize power. Everyone else, the majority of the people, are peaceful, no matter what nation they come from. Excuse me. No matter what nation they come from, people are peaceful. They want to get along with one another. But few maniacal people are the ones who you have to be maniacal in order to struggle and kick and fight and stab and scratch your way to the top. And that's what happens. The greedy, maniacal demons are the ones who seize power, and they steer entire nations into death, into wars and death and destruction.
Instigators in the playground.
Yes. So what we have to do is become active. There are many people like you who are urging people to stop being lazy, because laziness feeds these evil rulers. It endorses them, it encourages them, empowers them. They take power and they use our money, our earnings, and our collective power to do their evil and destroy the world. So we have to be active. Governments are all fearsome, as our founding fathers told us. They're fearful masters. So we have to be their master. We have to, basically, I don't have any faith in representative government, because when you appoint a representative, that guy is going to become corrupted. I don't want anybody representing me but myself. And I feel that you probably feel the same way. You want to represent yourself. They should not be passing laws that I did not want them to pass. I just leave the Constitution the way it is and don't pass any laws.
That's right. Exactly. I feel the same way.
We need to get rid of representative government. I mean, no matter how fail-safe we make it, evidently it fails. It's never safe. It always fails. Look what a wonderful system our founding fathers set up, and look how they've perverted it, destroyed it, simply by disobeying, violating the Constitution continuously. So anyway,
that's
it's
right.
you, and it's not really us that are causing all this. But what happens is we have a God. Now, people find this hard to believe, and I never used to believe it myself until God drew me to him. If you read God's account of what happened to the ancient, his chosen people, Israel, which, that was just a chosen race, I guess, or nationality that typified or drew a portrait. God was drawing a portrait of those people who are today spiritual Israel. It doesn't matter. God doesn't care what color you are, what nationality you are. He doesn't favor one people over another. The Bible says that God is not a respecter of persons, but those Israelites represented the people who, of all nations, that minority who would find heart in their heart to know that there is a God with them, even though he's invisible, to see all the evidence of his creation. And those people would turn their minds to God, and those are the ones that he calls spiritual Israel. So you and I have that Spirit of God in us. You may not even know it. And it took me a long time for me to know it. But when you have this burning desire to speak to others, to try to right the wrongs that exist in the world, to try to speak out against injustice and cruelty and greed and murder, then you are indeed motivated by the Spirit of God.
That's right.
And now you've got His Spirit in you.
Agree.
And with that, you recognize God's presence, and the recognition of His invisible presence is what will drive out the demonic spirits. They're also evil spirits from these evil men. So basically, this is a spiritual battle. I know it's hard to believe, but we can talk about it more in the future. Well, anyway, getting back to this, God gets so fed up. I should say, fed up is a good term to use with God. He knows that the world is going toward its own destruction, which is what's happening today, because of these evil rulers that we have dominating the world. They get the high technology in their hands, and then they become a lot more dangerous than Julius Caesar, because Julius Caesar did not have that high technology, nor did Genghis Khan. But now they can destroy the world. Well, God has to put a stop to it. And the Bible, the book of Isaiah, there are many places in Isaiah and in other books of the Bible that show me that these men, they didn't go out and make up this stuff. They actually said, hey, I got these words that came from God. I mean, in my mind. These words were planted in my mind. I didn't make them up. And you could see it makes sense. Like, get this from Isaiah chapter 13. Quote, behold, the day of the Lord cometh. That means like the end, where this world is destroyed with the pole shift. The day of the Lord cometh, cruel, both with wrath and fierce anger. So God is angry at what the mankind or these evil men are destroying the world. Fierce anger to lay the land desolate, and he shall destroy the sinners thereof out of it. For the stars, now this is really scientifically logical. For the stars of heaven and the constellations thereof shall not give their light. The sun shall be darkened in its going forth. In other words, during the daytime, the sun will be darkened, and the moon shall not cause her light to shine. Now, this is God speaking. And I will punish the world for their evil, and the wicked for their iniquity, and I will cause the arrogancy of the proud to cease. George Herbert Walker Bush, Rothschilds, Rockefellers. I will cause the arrogancy of those guys to cease, and will lay low the haughtiness, the pride, the arrogance of the terrible. Therefore, I will shake the heavens, and the earth shall undulate. Get that? The earth shall, in this Hebrew, if you look up the word that's used in the King James Bible, and translate it correctly into its original Hebrew form, it says, therefore I will shake the heavens, and the earth shall undulate or wobble out of her place in the wrath of the Lord of hosts, and in the day of his fierce anger. The book of Isaiah, chapter 13. So God is forewarning us that the earth is going to wobble, and there's only one way to do that, to make the earth wobble. If you, as a physicist, physicists would say there's only one way to do it, either with gravitational force or magnetic force or both, a combination of both, and that's exactly what this incoming dwarf star, Planet X, has, which is estimated to be larger than Jupiter. It has tremendous mass, and we learn in physics, the larger the mass of a body, the greater its gravitational pull is. And it also has a strong magnetic field. So as it passes by Earth, as it's being gravitationally pulled in by the even larger sun, toward the sun, it has to pass over Earth on its way toward the sun. As it passes within millions of miles of Earth, which is close, it will exert its gravitational force and its magnetic force to lock on to Earth and yank it. Like a bowler would put a spin on the ball. As the bowling ball is released from the bowler's hand, he throws his hand up and puts a spin on the ball, and that's what gives it that hook. Well, the same thing happens with this huge gravitational and magnetic invisible hand at a distance of millions of miles away as it passes by Earth, and that's how you can get the Earth can be made to change its direction of rotation, or not only rotate in a different direction, but what about north to south? Instead of rotating horizontally, it can be made to rotate vertically so that the North Pole rotates down toward the equator, and the equator rotates up toward the North Pole. Now, it doesn't have to rotate that far, but if it rotates vertically even 20, 30 degrees, then you have tremendous devastation. That's called a pole shift. The geographic poles are actually shifted, and this has been proven to have occurred in the past. And some of the most convincing and graphic evidence of that vertical rotation of the Earth, the pole shift, occurred probably, and the stars of the movie, these young people, go into the New York Museum of Natural History, and they see these mammoths, these big woolly mammoths, which are like giant elephants with brown fur and large curved tusks. And the mammoths are, I guess what you'd call stuffed or mounted anyway. And then one says to the other, do you realize that these mammoths were found frozen under many feet of ice near the Arctic Circle with tropical vegetation in their mouths and in their stomachs? Now, that could only have happened, having tropical vegetation in their mouth and in their stomach, yet being frozen in the Arctic tundra under many feet of ice. That could only happen if the Earth instantly or within an hour rotated vertically such that the tropical zone in which these mammoths existed moved in toward the North Pole or the South Pole and froze in a matter of an hour. These mammoths were still standing on their feet. They didn't even get a chance to roll up and curl up as any animal would do when it begins to freeze. It curls up into a ball and lays down on the ground, tries to get warm.
So instantly froze.
They were standing on their feet. It's amazing. And many of them were hundreds of them have been excavated from many feet of ice. They were buried deep under the ice. Yeah, so we know this evidence indicates that pole shift of the tropical region where these mammoths lived, that region got shifted toward the North Pole in a matter of, say, an hour or even less. At the same time, what was at the North Pole was what was at the North Pole then, just before the shift, was Toronto, Canada, Minnesota, the Great Lakes. That was at the North Pole. Because now the other side of the world was Siberia. So, what was tropical around, say, in Russia, southern Russia, got shifted northward with the mammoths up to northern Siberia, and they froze. At the same time, on the other side of the world, you had movement in the opposite direction. The North Pole moved southward. Toronto moved from the North Pole down to where it is now. So the Great Lakes were frozen. They began to thaw, and that's how we get the Great Lakes. So that's evidence of a pole shift that occurred. And
that's 1 hour. I mean, that is amazing. I mean, there's no preparing for that. I mean, if that happens, you're going to be in the same boat pretty much the mammoth was. Surprise.
Well, God tells us that. Yeah, God tells us though that before the great destruction that we speak about as this pole shift, people who are you still there, Michael? Can you hear me?
Oh yes.
Oh, okay. Okay. I hope I'm speaking loud enough.
Yeah, now you are. It comes and goes. You get a little low and then you get higher. So if
have
you
you
could
checked
speak nice and loud.
Have you checked your equipment to make sure that it's set properly? I
yeah,
feel like
I have.
Shouting at the.
Oh, well, you're coming in fine now. So.
Okay, good. Let's see. God says that before this great disaster occurs, people are going to know about it. God is going to show us signs. In fact, there'll be angels, believe it or not. And there'll be many ways that God will communicate to us his outreach to us, asking us to turn our minds to him, call out to him with our hearts. And of course, you're going to call out, and I'm going to call out with all my heart, because I'm going to be in terror, stark terror, at what's going on the earth. So, and I know there was one time when I was in combat, in a combat zone, and I thought I might get killed that night. I thought I might not wake up the next morning. And for the first time, I went from being an atheist to somebody who actually talked to God. that shows you that most people will call out to God when they're in terror, in fear of losing their lives.
No atheists in foxholes, huh?
That's right. So God says, if you call out like I did, even though I was an atheist and I had did not deserve to be forgiven, God will forgive me at that moment. But I don't want to wait. I don't want to, impose upon His graciousness. I want to bring my heart to God now, every day, as much as possible. Forcibly make myself aware of His invisible presence. So when the destruction comes, He says He will supernaturally, now this is amazing, supernaturally take us up off of this destroyed earth before it goes into self-destruct. He will take us off of this earth. The Bible says that in several places very clearly. But it won't be the body. The body will stay behind. But the spirit, which is essentially the soul, is energy of some form, which constitutes our real being or real existence. That energy will be taken up in an instant, it says, in the twinkling of an eye. Well, how quickly is a radio signal transmitted into space or across around the world in an instant at the speed of light? Energy can be transmitted at the speed of light. Now, people say, well, I don't want to be energy. I mean, I want to be a person, But what our soul is energy housed in a body, in a physical body. And God promises that He will give us a brand new body. And that body, if we think this body is great when you're young, I mean, I'm not talking about when you're old. If we think this young or youthful body is wonderful, and it is fantastic, it's nothing compared to what the eternal body will be when God takes us up. When we call out to Him, He will take us up in an instant off of this self-destructing earth, and we will get new bodies. Sounds impossible, doesn't it? It really does. But isn't it impossible that a human being could exist? The most marvelous machine ever known, that a human being could be created? Well, it's happened, hasn't it? And that trees can be created, and planets, and animals, and flowers, and everything was created out of nothing by God. People might say, well, that evolved, but it's even dumber to think that all this evolved than it is to think that God created it. Because how could you have evolved? If you look at your eyes, what a fantastic invention. I mean, mutations cause that. Mutations are destructive. If you get irradiated, your cells of your body become mutated, destroyed, turn into grotesque cells that are deadly and dying. That's what radiation does when it causes mutation. So if our unbelieving, ignorant scientists tell us, oh, we evolved by mutations, well, mutations could not make create a marvelous machine like the human body from nothing. Mutations would only degrade the human body to nothing, not create it from nothing. So it's crazy to think that we evolved. So the only other explanation is this marvelous body. 2 eyes for stereoscopic vision. The reason you have 2 eyes is because you're able to see depth. The reason you have 2 ears is to allow you to detect where a sound is coming from. And you have a nose that's able to smell thousands of different fragrances. And God creates the fragrances with flowers. It's just amazing. So that the evidence is overwhelming that we were created. So don't be cynical or skeptical. I urge people not to be skeptical about the ability of God to take this soul zapped up in the sky from the self-destructing earth and give us a brand new body. Because He's done the miracle already with this body. So He's going to capable of giving us the miraculous new eternal body where there's no more evil, no more new world order, no people abusing you and oppressing you, enraging you every day with atrocities and abuses and crimes against humanity. No more of that. These evil men will be put to rest because the evil spirits, the evil fallen angels that are now dominating these evil men and controlling them like puppets, those fallen angels will be destroyed. Getting back to
John, I just want to say that I have absolutely no doubt that there is intelligent design behind everything we are and see. I mean, it's all in just such a fine balance. I mean, to think that everything just developed that way. Yeah, I agree with you. That sounds crazy to me.
I mean, if a statistician... No, it's okay. If a statistician were to give you the odds as to the odds of this whole world coming together with the Earth revolving just in the right distance around the sun so that you have the 4 seasons and fragile human life could exist at these very narrow temperature range from winter to summer, and with crops being able to grow and flourish with just the right amount of rain, and it's just amazing. The odds of that happening by accident and the human body coming about, with just look at the human hand. It's just amazing. 4 fingers and 1 opposing thumb. And with that hand, 4 fingers and an opposing thumb, you can play the violin, or you can build foundation walls with masonry, or you can do anything with those hands. You can paint. It's just a miracle what the human hand can do, and how the joints of the knee, so that your legs can bend and you can walk. You know, you've got legs that are designed, and feet that rotate on the ankles so that you can walk and run, and arms that can move. You have two portions of the arm that bend and allow you to pick up things. So the body is extremely well made and functional for a variety of different tasks. Anyway, getting back to these quotes, we all know that legends are the way that many ancient civilizations have passed down their historical records through spoken word, legends, sagas. Well, in the legends of the Toltecs, Toltecs, who preceded the Aztecs in Central America, we read of a time when, quote, there was a tremendous hurricane that carried away trees, mounds, houses, and the largest edifices, notwithstanding which many men and women escaped, principally in caves and places where the great hurricane could not reach them. All this time they were in darkness, without seeing the light of the sun nor the moon, unquote. Here's another one from Edgar Cayce. Now, Edgar Cayce was the greatest prophet. It was just amazing the things that he prophesied in his sleep. He didn't even know what he was saying. He would go into a hypnotic trance and be able to cure people whom he had not even met, and they were actually cured. In fact, his cure rate was so phenomenal, and he was so famous that his son Hugh Cayce, I have him on a documentary, his son Hugh Cayce says, they used to bring the mail to his house in trucks loaded with people pleading with him to help save their relative or save them from a disease that the doctors could not cure. So this man had some power of God, and he always said it was from God that he got this power to actually know what was the cause of a disease that a person had without even seeing that person, even if that person were miles away. Sounds incredible, but it's documented. It's all documented in a huge library called the Association for Research and Enlightenment in Virginia Beach, Virginia. Now, me being of a scientific background, I had to accept this as being absolutely true because it's been proven. The documentation is all there. Well, when he was in his trance healing people, and of course they recorded everything, his wife and secretary recorded everything that he said about the patient and what was the cure that he advised while he was in a trance. However, during these trances, he would also not only cure people, but he would come up with prophecy of what was the things that were going to happen in the future. And I'm reading here from Edgar Cayce while he was in hypnotic sleep, quote, he said this, when there is great volcanic activity in either Mount Vesuvius or Mount Pelée, then the southern coast of California and the areas between the Great Salt Lake and the southern portions of Nevada may expect within the following 3 months an inundation of earthquakes. So when he was saying, when you see, keep your eye out. In fact, we should be doing this now. Look for volcanic activity in either Mount Pelée, which is in the Lesser Antilles in the Caribbean Sea, one of the islands there, Mount Pelée, or Mount Vesuvius in Italy. Either one of those, then within a few months, the West Coast is going to be rattled by some massive earthquakes. So if we want to avoid those earthquakes or warn people, just watch what's happening as a precursor, what's happening with these volcanic eruptions, either at Mount Pelée or Mount Vesuvius. Continuing on, from a worldwide address by Native American Hopi Indian elder Thomas Banyakya, quote, nature and the spirit of our ancestors are giving you loud warnings. Today you see increasing floods, more damaging hurricanes, hailstorms, climate changes, and earthquakes, as our prophecies said would come. Why do animals act like they know about the Earth's problems, and most humans act like they know nothing? If we humans do not wake up to the warnings, the great purification will come to destroy this world, just as the previous worlds were destroyed, unquote. He's saying the same thing that we're saying here, that these ancient historians told us of previous destructions, and the Hopi Indians echo that same statement. In the Syrian city of Ugarit, Syria, was found a poem dedicated to a celestial body which, quote, this celestial body massacred the population and exchanged the directions of dawn and dusk and changed the positions of the stars, unquote. That was on a tablet in ancient Syria. This celestial body massacred the population, wow, and exchanged the directions of dawn and dusk, meaning the earth rotated, changed its direction of rotation, and the sun rose in the west, set in the east. Now it's just the opposite. So all these civilizations are saying the same thing. The earth changed its direction of rotation. The Eskimos of Greenland told missionaries that in an ancient time, the earth turned over and the people who lived then were scattered to different parts of the earth. And this was also quoted in the book Worlds in Collision by Dr. Emanuel Velikovsky, that, again, the earth turned over and the people who lived then were scattered to different parts of the earth. Now imagine taking somebody from Egypt and they get scattered to South America. How could that happen? Well, when you look at the splitting of the continents, take a look at the map, and many people have noticed this strange congruity between the Americas and Africa and Europe, such that if you were to move Europe westward, it would match up with, like two puzzle pieces, it would match up with North America, Central America, and South America. Not exactly match up, because remember, when this great split of the continents occurred, certain coastal areas were sunk beneath the sea. So what you see above land is not an exact matching piece in the Americas with the coastal edges of Europe. It's not exact, but it's close enough to see that originally they were connected.
Enough evidence saying that our magnetic field is actually weakening, and what will happen, if I'm right about this, is it'll get so weak until it eventually flips, correct?
Yeah, because it's a complex situation, but I've done a lot of thinking and studying of the whole phenomenon of the Earth's magnetic field getting weak and beginning to drift, and then, as many scientists say, once it passes that period where it becomes weak and begins to drift off of its poles, away from its geomagnetic poles, north and south, then it begins to reverse itself. And you have to look at the cause. First of all, what causes the Earth's magnetic field to be generated in the first place? And once you understand that, then you can understand what mechanism would cause the magnetic field to reverse itself. Well, that mechanism that causes the Earth's magnetic field to be generated in the first place is the swirling circular motion of the liquid metal core within the Earth. The Earth has basically a core, an outer molten, mostly iron core. And within that mostly iron core is a hard, scientists believe, is a solid metal inner core that's smaller. So it's sort of like a solid, it's a solid metal core within a larger liquid outer core. Now, this outer liquid core swirls sort of like a whirlpool in your blender. If you've ever watched the food or liquefied food in your blender, it sort of creates a circular whirlpool. And that's what happens to Earth as a result, Earth's molten core, as a result of Earth's rotation. And that all makes sense, too. I mean, you could take a bowl of liquid and take an example of a potter. Do you ever see a clay potter? He puts a clay pot on a rotating pedestal. And a motor rotates that pedestal as the potter holds the wet clay and shapes it with his hand as the clay turns or rotates. Well, if you took a bowl of water and placed it on that rotating pedestal, you would see the same kind of swirling action that occurs within the rotating Earth. Now, that magnetic field, as long as that swirling motion of the Earth's molten iron core is smooth and regular, then you're going to have a very nice, strong magnetosphere surrounding the Earth. It'll be vertical. The lines of force will be vertical. That is perpendicular to the horizontal flow of the molten core itself. So the magnetic field is perpendicular, like the skin on an apple. You'll see those little striations or streaks, vertical streaks on the skin of one of those delicious apples or a different kind of apple. You'll see vertical streaks. Those streaks might be likened to the invisible vertical magnetic field lines surrounding the Earth. So as long as that swirling molten core is smooth, it revolves in a smooth swirling action, then the magnetic field will be strong. But what is happening now is you're getting these irregular blasts of electrical particles, negative electrons and positive protons from the sun, which are excessive, more frequent, more powerful than in normal times. And as a result, this energy, the electric electrons, negative electrons and positive protons, strike the magnetosphere sort of like a balloon. I'm likening that skin on the apple now to a balloon surrounding the Earth, and that balloon gets hit and it becomes compressed by the electrical energy, which is actually electromagnetic energy from the sun, because of moving particles, these streams of electrical particles from the sun, generate their own magnetic field. So you have a magnetic field from the solar wind jousting with the Earth's own magnetic field. And there's a clash, there's a dance between the two, and one pushes back against the other. And the net effect is that this energy from electromagnetic energy being blasted out from the sun feeds back, is coupled back, just like an electrical transformer would couple electrical energy from the one winding, one coil of wire in a transformer to an adjacent coil of wire. Even though there's just an air gap, there's no electrical metal connection between the two coils of wire. They're both parallel to one another. Still, that electromagnetic energy is coupled from one wire to the primary winding to the secondary winding of a transformer. Likewise, that energy from the solar electromagnetic sun's solar wind energy is coupled into Earth's magnetic field. It feeds back just like into the core of an apple, feeds back, and now it begins to disturb that solid iron core, that nugget within the swirling molten core of the Earth. And that core, that solid nugget, that metal core, deep within the center of the Earth, begins to get pushed, actually pushed. There's a force, a magnetic force from this field feeding back into the Earth that is nudging that metal solid core off of its center point. This is my theory. No one else has really expressed this theory before that I know of. And I've just put it out. I've taken a lot of time to write it up very carefully. And this is, again, a theory, but it makes a lot of sense because it conforms to the principles that I used to teach in physics and that I've learned in the study of physics. It all sounds very basic to me.
Well, it does make a lot of sense, and there's enough evidence in history to show that the magnetic field has, flipped before, and that goes without saying. But what is the worst case scenario? Now, I guess I don't want to use the word if this happens. It's more of when it happens. What's the worst case scenario?
Well, I can read you historical accounts, ancient historical accounts of when this occurred in the past, because scientists, many archaeologists, I should say, are now revealing their studies indicating that these kinds of catastrophes have happened in the past, and they have been provoked by incoming comets. At several thousands of years ago, these things happened at numerous times in the past. So what I'll do, in order to answer your question, I'm trying to find some little quotations that I got from ancient historians. But, it's a little bit worrisome to hear about these things. But before I read them, know that there is a God who has created all of this. He's in control. God is in control of all these events. And God, I don't expect people to believe it now, but just remember it when the time comes, when the difficult times do come. Remember that God loves you. And God says He is bringing this upon earth in order to wake us up, to give us a really strong wake-up call. And if we respond by actually turning our minds and our thoughts to His invisible presence, then He will protect us from all of these